State Director of Athletics Gene Taylor with us, also a member of the College Football Playoff Committee here on 365 Sports. And every time we talk to you, it seems like something's changed in a lot of great ways for the Big 12. But the last time we saw you or spoke with you, there are 4 new teams. And I know that's now been a couple of weeks or so. How much is too much, and is this kind of the number you guys always wanted to be at?
Yeah, I don't know that we ever really had a number that we talked about specifically, in all the process. Obviously, it was more strategy about the what-ifs, right? What was the Pac-12 going to do if we had a chance? Who would we want, out of the Pac-12? Where did we want to go? And obviously, some of it happened just because of what happened in the Big 12. I mean, I think Colorado was an early focus for both Brett and all of us. I think they were the one that showed the earliest interest. And then, I think once the Oregon-Washington thing happened, then it just made so much sense. And there had been some conversations, I believe, with Arizona in particular. So I think it wasn't like, okay, we have to get to 16, we have to get to 18. I think we'd have been fine at 14. Obviously, you typically want an even number. And I think we'd have been fine at 12 for right now. I think we'd have still been probably evaluating what was out there. But I think we're good. I really do. I think Brett's come out publicly and said that. And I think for right now, I think we're in a good place.
Gene, what's it like to have been on the offensive during this cycle ever since Texas OU, and even in the past with other changes in the conference where there were times where everybody had to look around and go, okay, what about us, and are we going to make it? We've spoken with you before. What's it like to have been on the offensive rather than reactive or on the defense?
It's funny you say that because there's some sadness to this too, right?
Yeah.
I know exactly how the ADs feel at Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford, and Cal, because I was one of those ADs that felt that way 2 years ago when, as you mentioned, people were talking about where everybody was going, and Kansas State and a couple other schools weren't in that mix. And it's a very empty feeling. You get frustrated, you get scared, you get angry, all the things that's coming out of those schools. And that's the sad part about it. So as I was happy to be on the aggressor and be the one that we were in a little bit much better position, I felt bad because I knew where those athletic directors and those programs, what they're facing. And it is a sad deal. They're great programs, great ADs, but it feels a lot better sitting in the chair I'm sitting in now than I was a couple of years ago.
So, many of the Big 12 schools, because there is a narrative, and it's kind of lazy at the blue bloods and who's going to survive the next. It's like we can never relax. No one can ever just take a deep breath, because there's even now with what may be happening with the remaining Pac-12, the Mountain West. We had Gloria Navarro's on yesterday, the ACC. And so do you feel like Kansas State and a lot of schools in the Big 12 have always had hey, this is who we are, that you can't relax, but do you still have to constantly make sure you're on edge, making sure you're doing everything for the future of what it means for K-State in the Big 12?
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, I think if you do relax and you get too comfortable, then, you're going to be caught off guard a little bit. And I think that's what Brett brings to the table as our commissioner, is just some really innovative and creative things to keep us in the forefront, both. But it has maybe not even with new schools. It's just, the marketing side, the branding side, halftime entertainment at Big 12 championships and all the things that we're doing as a conference. I think those are real innovative and creative, and I think you have to do that a lot. And I think it also brings recognition from athletes that say, hey, the Big 12 is maybe a place that I want to compete in.
You are on the College Football Playoff Committee. We know that it's about to go to 12, and it was amazing for the longest time. There was nothing, and then the BCS, and then there's now 4. There's always the concern about who's going to get the opportunity. Everybody right now seems like they're going to have a chance when they start workouts in August. Going to 12, would that increase the opportunities, not just because of the number? Or is there a concern that because of what might happen with an Autonomy 5 like the Pac-12, that there's going to be a turf war on who gets maybe that other spot?
Well, that's, obviously we don't get to make that decision necessarily in the committee that I'm on, the selection committee, but I know that's a conversation that the commissioners with Bill Hancock are going to be having. Is the original intent was to have 6 conference champions and 6 at large. And I think it was going to be the 6 highest rated conference champions and then the 6 at large schools. Now that, if the Pac-12 doesn't survive, is it a 5-7 deal? Is it I'm not sure what they're going to do. From a selection standpoint and who gets in, we because we just actually met a couple weeks ago, and we kind of indoctrinate the new members and we go through our selection process. We did a evaluation of what the 12 field would look like compared off of last year's team. And it's still, the system is going to be the same because we do that even every year. We rank the top 25, obviously. It's just going to be a real challenge to figure out because the resumes, particularly 7 through 15, 16, 17, 18, look very similar. And how do you get them down to 12? So I think the selection process isn't going to change in terms of how we evaluate teams, whether it's 6-6 or 5-7. That's a decision that the commissioners will make.
So you brought up Brett Yormark, and he's obviously the topic of discussion with what he's done in just over a year. All of the energy that he has brought, along with everybody who's a part of the Big 12. When he first came up as someone who was a candidate to replace Bob Bowlesby, what was your initial impression, or what did you actually know about him, and has it been so much more than you ever thought?
So it's a funny story. I was actually in Vegas. I'll never forget this. And it broke that he was our commissioner. It was not that I was tracking. And one of the writers asked me, do you know who Brett Yormark is? I said, I have no idea. Because it wasn't a collegiate name. It wasn't somebody from the traditional. So when I looked him up and read his resume, I'm like, whoa, this is impressive. This guy's impressive. Never met him for Adam, right? And then the first time I met him, I knew we better strap it on because he was bringing a lot of energy. His mind works in a very different way than the traditional athletic director or conference property staff. And he brought a lot of energy. And it's probably been not more than I expected, but I knew we weren't going to be sitting idle under his leadership.
How much did the breath of fresh air kind of at times maybe energize the Big 12? Not that it was stuck in the mud, but sometimes people just don't like to get outside the box.
Yeah, I mean, and I said this before, I think all of us, ADs in particular, we kind of, we kind of do things a certain way. We've been doing it a long time, and we have our focus. And to get, the way Brett thought about things, whether it was, the TV deal and people that he knew in the business and the industry, how he looked at it from a marketing and branding perspective, it was fun. It was fun to go through it. He challenged us to think differently. And the great thing about Brett is, he was very respectful of, he knew he wasn't a college guy, right? He knew what he didn't know, but he was going to challenge us to a point where if we push back enough, he'd be like, okay, let's look at something else. Mm-hmm. But he really puts it out there, wants our opinion, wants us to say, hey, Brett, this doesn't work or is going to work. But he does make us think very differently, and it's been a lot of fun.
So what is the discussion now that the conference will be 14 this year, 16 starting next year? What are your thoughts, Gene Taylor, Director of Athletics at Kansas State with us, 365 Sports, on making sure that the schedule doesn't get out of whack where sometimes one year it's a little uneven with the competition of who you're playing? Because you get to play everybody. It was truly everybody played everybody, and then there was a championship game. Do you want it to be pods, divisions? How do you want to see this in the starting next year with 16 teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are probably just starting that process now and having those conversations. We met a little bit. We were in Dallas yesterday for some meetings. There's scheduling committees. There's 2 basketball committees, men and women's, and then there's a football committee, and then I'm on the football one. So we just really started to have, what does that look like? And, I think you talk about, protected rivalries, who you're going to always want to play every year. At the end of the day, I think our goal as a conference is to put a schedule together that at the end of the season we've got the two best teams playing for the championship in as fair a way as possible, so that hopefully we have as many teams as possible get into the 12-team playoffs. So I think if that's our end result, how we get there, I think we can look at a lot of different models. But our number one goal is how do we best put the two best teams in the conference in the conference championship, so both of those teams have a chance to be considered for the playoff expansion. And if we do that, then how we get there, I think, is going to be a fun conversation, but it'll be an interesting one.
Kansas State has the longest, like among the top 10 longest running rivalries in football with KU, Iowa State. It was for a while with Nebraska till they left, and now you're going to have Colorado back in the conference. Is there a concern at all? Do rivalry, you mentioned that as far as the schedule, but are we seeing more and more disintegrate, and is that kind of the tough part of realignment?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. One, I think there probably have been some schools that have played each other a long time every year, but I also see an opportunity for our fans to see some new teams and maybe to build some new rivalries. I mean, imagine Arizona from a basketball perspective coming into our places that have great fan support. Arizona's going to come in and maybe, haven't seen that kind of energy, except maybe at McHale. And so there's going to be some new things. I look at the Big Ten and, I know obviously Michigan State play every year, Michigan, Ohio, but Iowa, when I was at Iowa, we didn't play Michigan every year. We didn't play Penn State. But everybody was okay with it. Obviously, they played Iowa State. So I think if you protect those long-standing ones, you maybe create some new ones. But, yeah, I mean, I think everybody looks at it a little differently. And to me, I think as long as we, again, put together a schedule that's interesting and your fans still can stay engaged and still keep the really top rivalries together, I think that's the most important thing.
Where are you now with discussions on your uniforms and shoes with Nike? I know the others would love to be a part of Kansas State, but I also know that it's kind of a hot topic right now with K-State.
Yeah, we're at a point where we've got to make a decision here pretty quickly. There's certain order windows that start for the 2024 season. Our contract with Nike ends in June of 24, so we've got a decision to make. We've been evaluating this the last several weeks, and we're probably pretty close to pulling the trigger and getting it done. And probably within the next several days, we'll have an answer.
How much of that, Gene, just the inside part of business, without getting too many details, is also important to someone like Jerome Tang, who's had a great relationship with Nike?
Well, that's all a part of it, right? You have coaches that have a familiarity with a certain brand. There are some recruiting things that come into the discussion. Obviously, I think the quality of the product, which I do think, no matter what group is out there, they all have great product. Somebody has better shoes or in this sport or that sport. I mean, that's always part of the conversation. And then there's some, coaches that have been with a certain brand for a long time. So besides just the dollars and cents of it, all of that comes into play. And it's very, very important as a part of the decision as to where coaches are and athletes too. But at the end of the day, the athletes have a big, they're a big part of it as well. So there's a lot that goes into that conversation. It's good to be able to have options, and then we'll see what we come up with. When
you were in Dallas at the Big 12 meetings, was realignment even much of a discussion compared to perhaps the last year or two as far as on the radar?
Well, it kind of was. It wasn't probably as much as it was, obviously, if you think about it, we had the media day, and then a couple of days later, Oklahoma and Texas announced, so that cut, last year, obviously it was because we'd already knew that Cincinnati. I think this year there was just that question of what was the Pac-12 going to do? Were they going to stay together? Were they going to come up with a media package that that everybody would have been able to stay together? And if not, what was next, right? And so that was really kind of the conversation. It wasn't like, okay, hey, we're going to go after this school, or that school. It was more about stay tuned to what the big Pac-12 does. That's going to potentially change the marketplace a great deal.
Last thing, Gene, and we appreciate your time, is that you have these new 4, and then there's like the second wave coming next year. one of the things I loved about when there was the post-Texas OU, like, oh, my goodness, what happens? The 8 teams were as tight and together as I think the conference has ever been. Do you still feel that way with some of the new incoming schools from the Pac-12 who may have, rightfully so, tried to protect where they were and the conference they were in? But is everybody, you think, on the same page the way you were post-Texas OU?
Well, obviously it's been fun because you're right. The 8 have been tight, and we've been tight almost pretty much from day one. But, there was obviously some people looking. But once we realized that we were going to be all 8, that we really galvanized each other, both from the presidents and chancellors to the EDs. Then the 4 new schools came in. We brought them in early before they even had a chance to vote. So we got to know them, and they became part of that galvanization, so to speak.